All right. And just for the record, I'm on the line with State Representative Chris Rabb, who's a candidate for the first open seat in Pennsylvania's 3rd congressional district in 35 years, the nation's bluest congressional district. Representative Rabb is currently a state rep in Pennsylvania's 200th district. He's in his 5th term. Pennsylvania is a very progressive state. Representative Rabb, thank you so much for joining us here at Arab News.
My pleasure. I think Pennsylvania would be considered a purple state, but Philadelphia is
Ah,
certainly uh, quite blue. It's a one-party town, not unlike Chicago.
that's correct. You're right. It's Philadelphia, but the rest of us outside of that great state, we just look at one Pennsylvania. That's all we say.
Well,
So,
being as a native Chicagoan,
yeah.
I rarely thought of myself as uh, uh, a citizen of Illinois. I'm just from Chicago, that happens to be in the state of Illinois, so I
Well,
understand that perspective quite
we,
well.
Well, all the terrible things they say about Chicago politics. The truth is, Chicago politics is, if done right, is a good system for everybody, for voters and everything. So you're spreading the goodwill and probably, I'm sure, doing it the right way from what I've been reading online about you. Now, first of all, tell us a little bit about yourself. Why did you get into politics? What made you get into politics and run for public office?
Well, I was born into it. I was born into a very civically engaged family. And also, as a longtime family historian and genealogist, I've traced the footsteps of my ancestors in this country going back many generations and multiple centuries. And the more I discovered about my family beyond the ones I knew and lived with and so forth, were generations of freedom fighters
Wow.
from all walks of life, from as far south as Mississippi to as far north as Manhattan. I knew all four of my grandparents who were civil rights activists, and their grandparents, my 16 great great grandparents, were all born when slavery was the law of the land in their respective states, and they all died free and or unfree is probably more accurate.
Right.
And some of them were staunch Black abolitionists. And so I come from that tradition of fighting the good fight and fighting for racial justice and social justice. And it's a legacy that I've sought to carry on, whatever I do. But I fell in love with public service when I became a state representative. And I saw an opening in Congress when I feel we need more principled um, uh, fighters who believe in democracy and shared prosperity. So I threw my head in the ring.
And the 200th state rep district, is that West Philadelphia? I mean, just explain it to us because I'm not really familiar with, as you can tell
Sure.
from my introduction.
Sure. It's the 200th legislative district is one of 203 such districts across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, representing roughly 70,000 people and four neighborhoods in Northwest Philadelphia. So it is
Got it.
a largely African American and white district that has mixed income and also very green in terms of close to parks and that sort of thing. And so it has a reputation um, uh, for it's one of it includes one of the oldest intentionally racially integrated neighborhoods in the country, which is
Wow.
Mount Airy, very similar to the neighborhood I grew up in Chicago, Hyde Park.
And then describe the 3rd congressional district. I assume it includes your state house district. And
Yes,
what
thankfully
else
it
does it
does.
include? Yeah,
Yes,
that would
because
help.
it will absolutely help on May 19th in the Democratic primary because I currently represent the bluest legislative district in the entire state. So I've secured the highest votes of any state rep in Pennsylvania history multiple times. And so my smaller legislative district is fully subsumed within the congressional district, which is basically the left side of Philadelphia. So it covers roughly 800,000 Philadelphians, just the city, no suburbs.
Oh,
It
wow.
is very diverse. It is a Black, largely African American plurality, and it's somewhat younger than the average urban district, and incrementally higher voter turnout, which of course in this nation is very low, but still incrementally higher than the average urban district. And all of those things definitely benefit my candidacy.
And I know, having grown up in the United States, that one of the first things you learn is Pennsylvania is one of the core foundations of freedom and democracy in this country. So you're coming from a really important area, and you're bringing that to Congress. Why you've made? I thought you made a very smart, fair statement about the Middle East after the October 7th conflict between Hamas and Israel, and then the violence that's taken place by Israel's government. You distinguish, I think, between Israelis and politics, Israeli government. You criticize the government. You don't criticize Jews or Israelis. You criticize Hamas, but you don't criticize Palestinian Christians or Muslims. And yet, that position, which I think, and I think most reasonable people would say, wow, that's a balanced, smart spot to be speaking about fairness for everybody. And yet, you've been targeted by some of the biggest pro-Israel activists, like AIPAC and this Canary site that
Mission,
attacks
yeah.
anybody that says anything positive for peace. How do you deal? Well, first of all, when you look at that, did you walk into this big war knowingly or unknowingly? Did you realize that you were going to be targeted just by being fair the way you were? You were fair.
I've grown up in a very racist society as an African American who grew up in Chicago and saw um, things firsthand on a very personal level, whether it's mistreatment by law enforcement, by school officials. I mean, this is none of this is new to me. It is just a greater intensity and on a larger scale. So I knew exactly what I was getting into, and I don't take that lightly. My sons are afraid for my life, to be perfectly frank, because of the positions I take,
Right.
even though I believe that they're fair and measured. I don't believe there is a hierarchy for human life. I believe in the sanctity of human rights, irrespective of ethnicity or nationality or faith. I don't think that should be a controversial issue. And of course, I make a distinction between Israel and Israel's right wing pro Trump government. Um, just as I make that distinction as an American who does not identify with our current administration that is deeply racist. And the critiques against people like me are born largely out of racism. There's a double standard for African Americans who speak unapologetically. We are called arrogant. We are called anti-white. We are assumed to be violent because we don't pull punches. I come from that tradition for generations and centuries, and I will not apologize for being a humanitarian without exception. And I saw that as a little boy growing up when I worked on Harold Washington's successful campaign to be the first
Wow.
Black mayor of Chicago. That was my first political campaign. I was 13
He,
years old.
wow. He was phenomenal. I
He
covered City
was, and
Hall from daily to daily.
he brought people together
Yes, he did.
in authentic and substantive ways. And that's what I believe. I believe that you can't be free until we're all free. And I stand in solidarity with Palestinians in Gaza and the genocide that's going on there. I can't be silent. When you're silent, you're complicit, and I won't do that. I want the same people to stand up for me and my community. And there's a long track record of African American leaders going back to certainly at least the 60s, if not before, who stood in solidarity with Palestinians. And when I get in trouble for saying I believe in a free Palestine, well, I believe in freedom.
Right.
Why wouldn't anybody
Right.
support that? That seems to be a reasonable and substantive position on that issue. But because of the type of tactics that these extremist organizations are using, they're basically weaponizing my blackness to say, oh, well, that must be because he is an anti-Semite, without knowing my story. My father was adopted by a bunch of Jewish med school students when he desegregated University of Louisville in the 1950s. So he actually grew up in his early adulthood learning Yiddish. And so I heard Yiddish in my household. I imagine that a lot of his friends from med school were what you would call Zionists, liberal or moderate Zionists and such.
Right.
I don't know if my father, who's passed away 20 years ago, would share my politics or not, but he would certainly appreciate the fact that I listen and engage all people in good faith. And I represent a very active Jewish population here in Philadelphia. I have a number of rabbis who have embraced me as one of their own, who believe that I stand for decency and care and empathy. And I take that very seriously when the attacks are just unending.
Yeah, it amazes me that when somebody says something positive, middle of the road, I want to support freedom for everybody. I don't want to discriminate against anybody. That offends some people, but that usually tells me the critics who are attacking you can't address the facts. So they have to create this thing, this aura that they hope sticks to you. But you see parallels between then what the African American community has gone through, even what the Jewish community went through during and after World War II, and the Palestinian community.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when we look at how we construct whiteness today, there was a time when that was a very narrow bandwidth of who white society considered white, who was of European extraction. Italian Americans weren't considered white. Irish Americans weren't considered white.
That's true.
Jewish Americans weren't considered white, et cetera, et cetera. And they were subject to structural barriers and discrimination that was unacceptable. And as an African American, I understand what that is. Those barriers have been harder to dissolve than these other communities that have been assimilated into whiteness. But it doesn't mean that just because they've assimilated, that those earlier slights and barriers weren't real and devastating, for a generation or two. And I think we have more in common than what divides us. And I think the more we talk about what those restrictions were, why they were put up in place, and how and why they were dissolved, gives us a path forward and allows us to have some level of solidarity if we can pull away the politics of division and say, look, this is in all of our interest if we see the commonalities. And that's really the basic humanity and decency that many of us were raised to believe, like in kindergarten, right?
Right.
It's the golden rule. So that's my North Star, right? When I see somebody, I see my neighbor.
And you see similarities in what they're trying to go through. The challenge, I think, for any people who stand up and speak for justice on this issue is that the Arab and Palestinian community, and even the Muslim community, the Arab Muslims in this country, are a little disorganized and somewhat weak because they've been ignored and pushed aside for generations. In the Middle East, and then they'd come here with that experience here and they kind of lay low, they kind of duck below the radar screen. So they're only recently, I mean, you think they've been around since I did a whole history on this for over 200 years in the United States, but it's only recently where they're actually getting involved in politics. Do you sense sometimes that I know you mentioned you get support from the Jewish American community that supports fairness. Are you getting support from the Arab community in the district and the
I
region?
am. I'm getting support from all over because there's so few voices that are prepared to speak up against extremism cloaked through cloaked with this notion of fighting anti-Semitism. And the reality is, there should be no hierarchy of discrimination. Anti-Semitism is no worse or better than Islamophobia,
Right.
or anti-Arab sentiment or anti-Black sentiment. It's all bigotry that is unacceptable.
Right.
And I don't. It's not a competition. It's all bad and it's all interrelated. And that's the fight that we need to fight together. So, as a result of me being one of only a handful of the 253 members of the state legislature here in Pennsylvania speaking out against attacks on peaceful students of all backgrounds who have set up encampments, who've expressed their First Amendment rights, people who've been doxxed and beaten up and kidnapped and disappeared and beaten and marginalized. Those are the people who deserve our attention and our care. And as a result, people have taken notice because there are so few of us in elective office who have done the right thing and spoken up and used our positions and our influence for justice. And I'm heartened by the people who've come up to me who I've never met, but because they saw me on social media, they see me at a protest or rally or trying to protect protesters from law enforcement who are harassing them in the state capitol. People are following me now, and not just folks who are seeking to troll or intimidate me, but who are supportive of me and see me as an ally. The reality is Arabs and Muslims have their own voice. They have their own leadership. I don't seek to supplant that, or I want to amplify those voices who want to be recognized as full human beings, citizens, and folks who care about justice in ways that they haven't been able to organize and get the type of influence that they deserve, because they have been marginalized for generations. And Muslims have always been in this country, as well as Arabs. Always. Many African American ancestors were converted to Islam in West Africa, and some of them had military background and were highly literate and trained folks who would go on to have rebellions. So our history, and also I'm a proud father of a Muslim. One of my children converted to Islam a couple of years ago, and it has been an extraordinary blessing to see his spiritual growth. So this is personal to me.
Yeah, the largest population of Muslims in America are African American. It's almost 45% of Muslims in this country are actually African Americans. I think African
And in
Americans.
Philadelphia, it's even higher.
Wow.
Philadelphia has one of the highest populations of African American Muslims. In fact, in my district, my current district, there is a masjid that used to be a church, that used to be a synagogue, because it used to be a Jewish enclave until white flight and folks left for the suburbs and Black Christians came in, and then Muslims created this mosque that is a place that I've visited a number of times over the years.
Yeah, I've always, I've covered politics 45, almost 48 years, and I felt politics is something you could argue and debate and have differences of opinion. But fighting racism is not something that should be debatable. It should be like a foundation of this country. It should be a foundation of democracy, and it's always good to hear and see people like yourself speaking to it in that context, that it's not really politics. It's about humanity, correct?
Absolutely. But politics, my grandmother, who was a community organizer, who died many years ago, used to tell me everything is political, even flushing the toilet, because who decides what infrastructure is put in a neighborhood? You could have one neighborhood that has running water and indoor plumbing and another one that doesn't, because those folks don't have the level of respect and political capital to be seen and appreciated by government and elected officials. So it's all a form of power in what we do with it. And one of the things that I'm very clear about is the worst thing you could call me is a politician. What I strive to be is a public servant. Both are elected.
Absolutely.
Politicians serve themselves and moneyed interests. Um, Public servants serve the people, and we need more public servants in elective office and fewer politicians.
All right, and I just want to let everybody know that my guest is Chris Rabb. He is running for Congress in the 3rd Congressional District, which you said includes half of Philadelphia. Is that correct? And
That's
that
correct.
constitutes the entire district, that northeast
So
western
part of North, all of Northwest,
and
Center City, West Philadelphia, much of Southwest, and most of South Philly as well.
but just because that's the boundaries of the district doesn't mean that people listening can't help you. They can help you regardless of where they're at, where they live. It doesn't matter
Yes,
at
that's
all.
right. Because
And
here's the thing, the congressional district, because it's the bluest district in the entire country, people who are looking for transformational change in Congress will have to look at those candidates who can deliver, and transformational candidates are more likely to come out of the bluest districts than purple districts, where they may not feel comfortable or feel that they're politically viable to talk
that's
about
interesting.
a free Palestine, to talk about ICE, to talk about structural racism, to talk about climate action. And as a result, that means that my race will be nationalized. People are going to be looking, particularly after what happened in New York City, and saying, can an old machine run town like Philadelphia replicate and be influenced by the success of Zoran Mamdani? And the short answer, I believe, is yes, because that same day that he won, Pennsylvania had a blue wave, and Philadelphia came out in record numbers.
That's
And the
true.
most exciting subset of that electorate was young people and irregular or disaffected voters. And I believe those folks will be most receptive to my ideas and my style of leadership and service.
Are there any other issues, Chris, that you wanted to talk about or mention before we thank you for taking the time to talk about all this?
Well, yes, actually, some people don't understand why it's so critical to be an unapologetic uh, proponent of a free Palestine. It relates to SNAP benefits. It relates to cost of living. It relates to the social safety net that the current administration is trying to tear into shreds, because all of this relates to what is in the best interest of billionaires. And if they benefit from endless wars, that's why they turn a blind eye to the genocide in Gaza. That's why foreign policy is influenced by corporate greed. That same corporate greed is what hikes up our prices, the cost of gasoline and bread and eggs and so forth. It limits our opportunities to have high quality access to the things that should be either free or affordable, because we have all the resources we need to end poverty, to provide free or highly subsidized childcare, clean and affordable transit, public transit, all of these things, the high cost of housing, which should be a human right. All of these things are related. So if you care about justice, if you care about affordability, if you care about fairness in terms of who is truly paying their fair share and who is not, then you should consider why a free Palestine matters.
Do you believe a lot of voters recognize that as a principle of, how it's integral to the actual democracy of this nation?
No, I do not believe that most voters know, and most people who are not registered voters, many of whom are adults, who are disaffected and believe that all politics is corrupt. But the reality is, politics will impact you whether you vote or not. So you might as well vote, and gain a literacy and understand how these dots are connected. And one of the reasons I mentioned before about how I identify as a public servant is that my job is to help connect the dots for people who are busy, distracted, frustrated, tired, who can't reasonably get substantive and reasonable information from other sources because corporate America dominates the media that most of us consume. So that's why I'm such a big proponent of independent media, of public media, ethnic media, because they provide a narrative and a context that you're not going to find on major networks because they have an agenda, regardless of what you think that agenda is. And so, if someone has not told you who you trust and who's in a position of power how these things are connected, how or why would you know that? It doesn't make you stupid. It makes you distracted. It makes you misinformed, underinformed, but doesn't make you bad or lazy or stupid. And I take that on as a public servant to connect those dots. And when I come to someone with authenticity and care and meet them where they are without talking down to them and saying, this is how our government works as it relates to the things that you care about, I'm often the first person who's ever done that. But I need help. I need more fellow public servants, coming into office and doing that work. I need more folks in media, more folks in other democratic institutions, lowercase d, to do that as well. And that's the way we will be activated and informed and ultimately self-organize to do the important work of democracy, which includes being a part of electoral politics.
And you said the election is May 19th,
May 19th, that's right.
2026.
That's right. On the birthday of the famous American Muslim Malcolm X.
Wow, phenomenal.
Yes.
His website, my guest website, is Chris Rabb, Chris Rabb, R-A-B-B, Chris with a C, chrisrabb.com. If you want to get more information, you want to support him, you want to show some support, go there to chrisrabb.com. Chris, real pleasure to meet you and talk with you. And I look forward to following your election and doing some more interviews and stories about what you're doing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's a real privilege.